Hello, my name is Rachel Evans. I'm an alcoholic. That is a lot to live up to right there. I pretty much laugh and cry like every hour on the dot, so I will probably do both of those things even if nobody else does. So my sobriety date is April 27th, 2019. I have a sponsor, and I do have the privilege of sponsoring other women. Two of my sponsees right now are pregnant, so there's rarely a day that goes by without me being forced to get out of my head, because there's a lot of emotions that go on there, no matter where you are in sobriety. So it really is a joy being able to work with other women in AA. And I have a home group. It's the Change Agents group. We meet in Raleigh on Sundays and Thursdays at 7:30, so they should be starting to pack in right now for their meeting. Don't know how it's going to go on without me, but I guess it will. So, I'm supposed to tell you in a general way what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. I had dinner at my sponsor's house last night, and she has a daughter who's 7, and so when I met her, I think she was 3. And this isn't the most spiritual thing my sponsor and I have ever done, but we were going back through videos on her phone of her daughter throwing temper tantrums over the years and laughing because they're quite entertaining. And one of the videos we were watching was the day I got sober, and her daughter's throwing this temper tantrum. We were laughing because, it was funny, but in that moment I was just sitting there thinking about how that day for me, I woke up that morning and I gave myself 2 options. I said, I'm either going to kill myself today or I'm going to have to do something differently. And I didn't know what either of those would look like. I didn't know if I had the courage to do either of them. And I'll go into more detail about how I ended up in a meeting that night. But, I just didn't know what life was going to look like then. I thought that my life was over, even though I was so young, too young for this to have happened to. And what I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous and what really hit me last night is this meeting's been going on since 97. I was 3, I don't know. This program has something working in it that on my own, I could never do. And my sponsor watching this video, it's this woman she has over a decade of sobriety at the time. She's up there just living a life with a family and is living this happy, sober life. And that same day, I was sitting at home completely broken, not knowing that it was possible. And so it's just crazy to me to realize, this program, the spiritual solution laid out is something that I could never accomplish on my own. I tried to stop drinking many times, but it never fails to amaze me, just what a powerful thing it is. Sitting in this room looking around at how many people there are, it feels like a real miracle, and I know it is. And I get really emotional about it sometimes because I'm just very grateful for the chaotic mess of a storm of a life that I have today. I wouldn't change a thing about it. So like everyone in this room, I was born. I was from Tennessee, lived in the same house my whole life until I went to college. I have 2 wonderful parents. They actually met on a blind date in Raleigh and got married 13 weeks later and are still disgustingly in love. So I like to think that I got my impulsivity from them. But hey, it worked out for them. I grew up on stories of my dad just being a crazy man all around Raleigh. Some of the furniture in our house he had stolen from various bars in Raleigh. So if you're familiar with Charlie Goodnight's or Mitch's, a lot of our porch furniture was from those establishments. And so I heard all these stories of my dad, playing bumper cars on Wilmington, things I aspired to at the time. And I remember asking him once, Dad, I heard all these stories about you having these crazy times in college and drinking a lot. What happened? And he told me that when my mom was pregnant with my older brother, he was sitting with a bottle of wild turkey and decided this isn't the man he wanted to be. And so he stopped. And so I always thought that that's what would happen to me. Not that I would get someone pregnant, but that something would happen and I would decide okay, it's time for me to stop. The crazy reign is over. Let's get it together. And I tried that for many years, and that was not my experience. But that was the closest picture of alcoholism I had in my family, was these stories of my dad who admitted that he drank too much and it got out of control. And there was one time when I was really in the thick of it, drinking at home, and my dad said, the way you drink reminds me of myself, and it was to numb something. It was like it was a medicine. And I looked at him, and I remember telling him, like, you don't know what you're talking about. He did. He really did. But I was like, that is, how dare you say something like that to me? Like, I'm doing this because it's fun, and people like me when I do it. And so, like, this idea I had of alcoholism was that it was a choice. Like, it was a complete choice. My dad was drinking like crazy, and then he could stop. So, like, I could do it, too. I didn't drink in high school. I was actually a narc, so if you threw a party, I was the one who told on you. I did not have many friends, which may be surprising after hearing that. My favorite activity in high school was parallel parking, which will come into play later in this story, I promise, but I was really good at parallel parking, and I still am. I will not let my pride go on that one. It's a fun time. So whenever I went to college, I decided I'm going 20 minutes down the road to the big city of Knoxville, away from my small hometown, and it's time for me to make some changes and be someone cool and fun. And one of the reasons I never drank in high school, one, I wasn't invited to the parties, was because I told on them all, but also my older brother is autistic, and so our house was pretty chaotic growing up, and my parents did a wonderful job. But I liked to toe the line as much as I could without causing real pain to my parents, because I knew how hard they had it dealing with my brother. So I was always trying to control the way that my family saw me. Like, I got straight A's. I would try to do the best that I could to make up for just how hard I knew it had to have been on them. So whenever I went to college and I got a little freedom, I was like, okay, I'm going to drink. And I don't remember my first drink. I don't remember my first few drinks. I should back up a little bit. My senior year of college, I kind of had this snowball effect of things. I woke up and went blind in my left eye. I was in a really bad car accident, and I started having severe panic attacks. And so another reason I went so close to home was because I just physically could not see myself leaving them. I had too much anxiety. And I've always been a highly anxious person. I still am. It's no surprise. But when I started drinking, that was the first time that I remember thinking, oh my God, is this how normal people walk around? I'm not scared of what's happening next. I'm not worried that they're judging me. Everybody here loves me, and I'm saying the coolest stuff they've ever heard. I didn't care what was happening, and I wasn't scared. And my whole life I had been scared, whether it was just I couldn't sleep well. I would go down to my parents' room every 30 minutes just because I was terrified to be alone, or things with my brother were going chaotically. I just don't remember a time in my life where I wasn't scared until I started drinking. And that first semester of college, it really snowballed. I started drinking as much as possible right off the bat. My roommate eventually moved out, and we were best friends in high school, and so, it was funny. I was going back with a sponsee on the fourth step recently, and I was reading some of mine to give her an idea, and I always laugh when I get to this one because it's about that roommate. And I resented her for accusing me of stealing her milk. And the thing is I did steal her milk, I just didn't like being accused of it. So I burned a lot of bridges pretty quickly in that first semester, and there was a period for a month where I just sat on my parents' floor back home and was doing puzzles. I can still remember Friends being on the TV and a Christmas puzzle in front of me, and I was just drinking, and that was my existence. I didn't go to class, I didn't talk to people, I just lived on that living room floor doing puzzles. And so my parents were like, I think maybe we need to change things up. Have you considered going to a different school, especially now that all this chaos of your senior year has kind of settled down? So I transferred to a school about 3 hours away, and the first semester I was there, I didn't drink, and my grades did not do very well. And so going into my second year of college, I said, okay, my grades were higher when I was drinking, so I should probably start drinking. And I know for a fact that was my thought process, because when the pandemic started, I found the autobiography I wrote when I was drunk, in which I explained that was my thought process. So I was immediately off to the races again. And my college experience was pretty much what you can expect from somebody who drank as much as possible whenever possible. I circled through friend groups pretty rapidly. I put my family in a lot of uncomfortable situations. I would frequently go on trips. The biggest one that I can think of is I studied abroad for a semester, and at about 2 a.m, my phone's at 2%. I'm blackout drunk in the middle of Spain. I don't know where I am, and I call my dad. And I said, like, I need to get to this nightclub. It was like the 7-story nightclub that everybody was going to. And I was like, I don't know where it is. Like, you have to help me find it. And my dad was like, Rachel, like, I'm in a different country. Like, I cannot help you. And I was like mad at him for not being able to help me. Like, I cannot imagine in hindsight just like the fear that my father must have felt at that moment, because that wasn't the first or the last time I did that to him. I mean, granted, sometimes it was from 30 minutes down the road. Sometimes it was just from a different state. But I really took advantage of my parents' love for me and that they would answer their phone no matter what. And I blamed them for me being lost and drunk in the middle of a country they had never been to. And that's just kind of how I operated my life. Was it doesn't matter if I let my phone die, if I get blackout drunk, if I have $2 in my pocket, somebody else is going to have to come fix this for me. I remember one time I made my aunt drive 3 hours to get me out of a tree that I had fallen asleep when I was drunk. I don't know how I stayed in the tree, to be honest. It feels like my balance should have thrown me off. But yeah, my college, like, there were a lot of like situations where I definitely, it was alarming the amount that I drank, and I was already like having some pretty severe consequences, both with my health and in my relationships. But I graduated in 4 years. Nobody had really sat down to have a talking with me yet, so I was like, I don't really have any consequences, so this must be normal. Kind of a little bit too, all my friends were going to grad school. And in the thing I chose to study, like, that's just what you did. That's pretty much the main option, is go to grad school. And I hadn't thought that far ahead. I've never thought that far ahead in my life. I still haven't, to be honest. But somehow I ended up getting into a grad school down in Florida, which, if you've ever been to Florida, especially in active alcoholism, I do not recommend it. I also don't recommend it sober, but especially if you're going to drink. So I ended up moving down to Florida. When I graduated, I did limp across the stage because I had fractured my ankle the night before. I did forget about that. So, like, people knew what was up. My family knew that something was not right, but it hadn't gotten so bad that people had really started to take like an interest in, and they thought it was a phase. It was just like, oh, Rachel's like her dad. She's going to go crazy and then stop. So I went down to grad school in Florida. And I did the whole geographic cure many times. Like, in college, I only had the same roommate probably for a max of like 3 months. I'm pretty sure I moved every single semester of college, or my roommate moved out every single semester, because I was just unbearable to be around. So I moved down to Florida, and I was a really big fan of like going to bed and saying, I'm going to change everything. Tomorrow I'm going to be a new person. I'm going to do this and that. And then waking up the next day and being like, don't know if I really meant that. And then just not doing it at all. But that was kind of my mindset moving down to Florida. I was like, I'm going to be this new person. I'm going to do so well in grad school. I'm not going to drink as much. And that is not what happened. I almost got kicked. Well, I didn't almost. I got asked to leave grad school there after 2 years because I had to take this shop class. And I actually just found out this story recently with like big machines. Like, I'm talking like mills and bandsaws, like pretty dangerous stuff that like any normal sober person would have like a healthy respect for. But one of my friends came up to visit me recently and told me a story about the time we had a class in the shop at 8 o'clock in the morning, in which I was like harassing the teacher. Apparently I asked him if his voice always sounded like that in the morning. And I have zero memory of this shop class whatsoever. And so like that's pretty much what that looked like. I did not really care what was going on or how I was affecting others or myself. So it's no surprise that I got asked to leave there. But the summer before I came here, so I was like, well, that's their loss. They don't know what they're missing out on. I'll just transfer somewhere else. And so I I got into NC State, which seems like an oversight on their part, to be completely honest. But at the time, I was like, that's right. I'm so good. More places want me. So I went back home to Tennessee briefly before I moved up here. And that summer was really like the summer that things, I remember for the first time, like really feeling like this was out of control. Actually, that's not completely true, because a few months before I got kicked out of that grad school, a lot of my friends from college were getting married, and at both of their weddings, I was basically escorted out for various reasons, which my parents were also at both of those weddings, and they were the ones who had to escort me out. And I remember one of the bachelorette parties, we were in Birmingham? I think it was Birmingham. And night one, everybody goes out, has a good time, and everybody comes back and goes to bed. But while they're in bed, I'm going through their purses to take some things to stay awake. And so they all go to sleep, and I clean the entire Airbnb. And when they wake up, it's clean, and I have mimosas for them. And they looked at me, and they said, Rachel, like, we're kind of worried about you. Like, are you okay? And my response to them was, am I an alcoholic? Probably. But is now the time to worry about it? No. And then I just shoved the mimosas in their faces. So I knew that something was different about the way that I drank. By that point, whenever I did drink, I pretty much exclusively blacked out. Like, there was no in-between for me. But the summer before I moved up here was probably like the darkest time I really remember. It's crazy that my last night drinking wasn't even the most embarrassing, shameful night of my life. And I have no explanation as for why that was the last time, other than the way I felt in the morning. I had this like moment of clarity. But that summer before I moved to North Carolina was really just dark. I remember my parents finally sitting me down and saying, like, you need to go get help for this. And so they made me see a therapist. And she made me write down, like, what would happen if I continued to drink the way that I drank. And I was facing some, like, issues with my family, issues with the law, issues with friends. And I wrote down on this sticky note, God, I threw it away like a month before I got sober because I was so embarrassed to look at it. But I wrote down my license and maybe my job. And at this point, like, I'm pretty close to losing the first one. And I've already been asked to leave a first grad school. So, like, both of those things are pretty much already on the way out the door, and I just didn't care. Like, that was the consequences I saw from my drinking. But I remember waking up during that summer every day just hating the skin I was in. I could not get rid of that feeling when I woke up fast enough. And it didn't matter. Whatever was closest to me that I could take to get rid of that feeling was what I was going for. Because just being sober in my skin and light of the things that, like, I thought I was or the things that I had done was just unbearable to me. So on my drive from Maryville, Tennessee to Raleigh, North Carolina, I can tell you that that is the exact length of the Big Book on audio tape. And I know that because I Googled Big Book, or I Googled Alcoholics Anonymous textbook. I did not know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous other than what I had seen in the TV show Shameless, which doesn't paint it in the best picture, I'll be honest, but I decided to listen to this textbook of Alcoholics Anonymous. And on my drive, I remember hearing so many things, like, one of the things that stuck out to me was this, like, the way that they felt about, like, how they feel in the morning, like, incomprehensible and pitiful demoralization. Like, I had never seen or heard the way I was feeling in the mornings laid out like that before. I called it hangxiety for hangover anxiety, and I thought everybody felt that way after they drank. Like, oh, I drank too much last night. I kind of want to die now. Like, I thought that was normal. But it, like, whenever I heard them say, like, pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, like, that hit me. I was like, I know that feeling. I have woken up with that feeling most days for the past 5 years. And I remember the two big things I grabbed from it were, one, you got to believe in something bigger than yourself, and, like, we really do not care what it is. Like, it doesn't matter what this higher power is. I felt like they really crammed that down the throat. Like, it doesn't matter, just can't be you. Like, pick something. And the second was that you need to surround yourself with other alcoholics. And I can say, like, being sober a few years now, like, those two ideas have kind of, like, fully fleshed out more in my life, but, like, those are still, like, the two basic ideas that keep me sober, is, like, believing in something bigger than myself and working with other alcoholics. So I heard that message, and I came to Raleigh, and I sat in the parking lot of a meeting and said, I'm overreacting. I should back up. I did get pulled over during To Wives, and so I was really not happy about that. And every time I hear the beginning of that chapter, I'm like, because I did not run that stop sign. Fun fact, the police officer actually never filed that, so I didn't have to deal with it anyway. But God doing for you and all that. So I sat in a meeting in a parking lot and then decided that I was just overreacting because I did tend to overreact. It just so happens like this was probably not the thing to assume I was overreacting about. I overreacted in every area, probably not that one. But so started grad school here. Within the first semester was put on academic probation. And within the second semester, I lived alone and I lived downtown. And it was a miracle if I got myself out of bed. I remember so many times I would just sleep in the grad office because we would all keep, I say we would all, they all kept like 1 or 2 beers in their desks. I kept like 1 or 2 handles of vodka and some pills, and I thought that was normal. But like sometimes I would sleep there because I wasn't going to get out of bed and go otherwise. And at this point, like I remember one night looking off of my balcony and just thinking, like, if this is all that I have to look forward to, like, I can't keep doing this. And, you know, my life on paper looked fine. Like, I was in grad school, successful, I mean, academic probation, but come on, you know, it's hard, whatever. My family was still there for me. They still loved me and cared about me. My friends, well, I'd only had them for a few months since I moved here, but they hadn't completely gotten fed up with me yet. And so the last night I drank, my friends and I went to a free concert. I'm going to back up again. I told myself I wasn't going to drink for 2 weeks because if you don't drink for 2 weeks, you don't have a problem. That's what I told myself. So I made it 4 days, and I had 2 drinks at a birthday party and thought, I did it. I have changed, and I have this thing under control. The next day I was blacked out by noon. Got my friends and I all to this like free concert on State's campus, supposedly got us kicked out of that. I learned this about a little over a year ago, that apparently I was running around like chasing them with baseball bats that night too. So when I learned that, I definitely made amends for that, but I have zero memory of that. And so when I woke up the next morning, I remember like that feeling that I had woken up with so many times, and one of my friends looked at me and he said, do you remember what happened last night? And I had been asked that many times. I had asked myself that many times. But for some reason, the way he looked at me and the way I felt that morning, I was just done. Because I didn't remember what happened last night. I never knew what I was responsible for when I woke up, and I didn't want to know. And I kept drinking because I didn't want to know. Didn't want to know who I was. And who I thought I was, I didn't like. So when my friend looked at me and said that, I was like, I laughed. I said, yeah, of course I do. And I packed up my stuff quickly and I left. And that's whenever I had that idea. Like, today's either my last day. It's my last day in one way or another. It's either my last day in general, or it's got to be my last day living like this. And so I remembered the big book that I had heard on my drive. And I remembered that I had looked up meetings because I had sat in the parking lot of one. It was also finals week at this point, which is not the best. No, there's never a good time to get sober. And it's always a good time to get sober, you know? So I was walking from the library to my apartment, and I passed a church. And I remember earlier that day I had looked up and there was a meeting there, and it was right around that time. And so I kind of thought, why not? I might as well. So I walked around the corner, and it was about a minute till it started, and I didn't know where the entrance was, and I was like, no, I'll just leave. And this man looks at me, and he was like, hey, are you going to the meeting? And I said, yeah, and I went inside. And I don't know anything that was said in that meeting. I don't remember anybody who was there. I remember introducing myself as an alcoholic and then wondering, like, was I supposed to do that? I don't know what the rules are here. I remember some guy, like, that now I know is chairing, and I was like, okay, he's the leader of AA. I got to go talk to this guy after, I guess. I remember everybody, like, chanting together, and I was like, what's happening? I don't like this. It's not my thing. But I also remember, the first time I ever drank. People talk about how it's like they could breathe finally, like this thing lifted off their chest. For me, it was like I had hope that I wouldn't have to keep living life in this like excruciating, sober life where I was anxious all the time. Like that's what the first drink did for me. And in that meeting, it wasn't like I could breathe finally. It was like I had this feeling like I did when I first drank, like maybe there's something on the other side of this. And so I met a guy there. He said, you should come to my home group. We meet on Monday. And I said, great. So that Monday, I pull up to this home group, and I'm parallel parking, which I'm really good at, okay? But I'm 2 days sober, so I'm shaking and crying and, like, sobbing parallel parking. I think I was, like, listening to, like, Lil Wayne or something, too, so it made no sense, the whole situation. But and it was one of those, like, left parallel parking, It's like we're not supposed to, that's not natural. That's not right. So anyway, I'm backing up and I'm readjusting, and I realize there's a woman in the spot beside me, and I was like, well, alcoholics, there's not that many of us. Surely she's not going to this place. And she was. And so when she walked in, she walked right up to me and she said, you're new, huh? And I was like, I don't know how you could say something like that to me. Like, yes, obviously. Crying. And she said, great, I'll pick you up for a meeting tomorrow night. And she did. And I know that I am an intelligent person. I'm not questioning that. But when I got sober, and I thank God for this all the time, I was so broken that I was just like, I was out of ideas and I was dumb. I didn't know what I was doing. Like if you told me to be here at 2:30, but the meeting started at 7, like I would have gone. Like I just didn't know what to do anymore. And so anything sounded like a better idea than how I was living. Now if somebody was like, great, I'll pick you up tomorrow, I'd be like, well, I don't know about this. Like, let's chat for a second, buddy. But she took me to her home group, and she pointed at a woman, and she said, you should ask her to be your sponsor. And I said, I'll do that. And I did. I walked up to this woman, and I said, will you be my sponsor? And she asked me, are you willing to go to any length to stay sober? And I knew the right answer was yes. I didn't know what my answer was, but I said yes. And she asked me if I was willing to work with other alcoholics when I had gone through the steps. And I knew the right answer was yes, so I said yes. At this point, like, I didn't know why I wanted to be sober other than just to stop feeling the way I was feeling in the morning. I didn't know if it was going to be possible for me to stay sober more than 2 weeks. I didn't know if it was possible to stay sober a year. Like, still, the only idea I really have of AA is from the movie Shameless and getting pulled over during Hawaii. So it's like a very, mixed out with early sobriety, just like distorted view of what this sober life could look like. But she said, come to my house and we'll start reading out of the big book. And I did. The first time I showed up, we laugh about this now, I meant to text her on the way, but I typed it, but I never pressed send. And so when I showed up, she was in her pajamas with her 6-month-old violently projectile vomiting onto their front lawn. And so she likes to tell me, like, you must have really desperately wanted to be sober if you showed up and you said, I want that. And I was like, that's a good point. That's a good point. But honestly, part of it, I was like, well, I already told her I'll be there. Like, I can't disappoint her. Like, I cared so much what people thought. To be honest, in the beginning, I was like, I have to go to the meeting. They're going to miss me. Like, what are they going to do without me? Turns out it's completely fine. But it kind of kept me going a little bit. And so I worked the steps with my sponsor. I met with her every week. It's very simply laid out in this book, and I'm very thankful for that because as a sponsor now, like, I realize I've never been pregnant in sobriety. I've never been, like, I don't know what to tell my sponsees to do about any life situation. And looking back, I realized, like, my sponsor never knew what to tell me in any life situation, right? Like, it's the same basic principles that worked to stop drinking that work in all areas of my life. I'm thankful that I don't have to come up with any, like, weird suggestions for sponsees because, like, I'm out of ideas. I'm out of ideas these days. And so the things my sponsor told me to do were the things lined out in this book. And I remember at like 6 months sober, I was extremely depressed. I was like, I've been doing this thing for half a year, and like I still I'm not feeling so hot. And there was a girl who had shared a meeting I went to who was like 5 months sober, and she was like, AA cured my depression. And I was like, that's great for you. Like, I'm doing something wrong. And well, at one point I was sitting beside my sponsor at a meeting, and she was trying to cheer me up by like showing me, she pulled up her leggings and said like, look, I haven't shaved my legs in a while. And so to show her how bad I was doing, I pulled up mine and a spider crawled out from my leg hair. So that's like what my first 6 months of sobriety looked like. Like, it was not pretty. The only explanation I have for like how I stayed sober is because like, I know it's gross, but I don't have an explanation. I did what my sponsor told me to do, and that's all I have. I prayed. I called women when I really didn't want to, especially when I didn't want to. On the drive over here, my wonderful bodyguards were talking about kind of like sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is not drink. And in early sobriety, like, that's all I wanted to do. And I think that's pretty normal. Like, you come in as an alcoholic, like, I was wired to drink. Life got a little uncomfortable. Somebody looked at me the wrong way. I'm going to go drink. I'll show you. I don't know why I always thought, like, me drinking was teaching you a lesson, but I did. So I had to walk excruciatingly in early sobriety through this feeling of, like, I want to drink so badly. I really don't have a way of living yet. I have these people that I see it's worked for. My sponsor with her puking kid and temper tantrum throwing kid, and she's still sober. Like, clearly it's possible. I just kept going. And I think in my sobriety, like, there's always been these moments where, like, I can look back and it's like a very clear choice. And in early sobriety, like, even though I really didn't have a defense against this drink, I did have a choice where it was like, okay, I have been living my life on self-will for so long. I know that in this moment, I can go drink, or I can go to a meeting, or I can call my sponsor, or I can take a shower, literally anything. Like, I have a choice, and that's not an easy choice to make. It's a really difficult choice to make, and I'm very thankful that I think my higher power had to have just been like guiding me and looking out for me, because I don't have an explanation as to why I chose not to drink in those early days. Because the more I think about it, like, it doesn't make any sense how we can do that. Like, it's a miracle. Like, every day that I don't drink is a miracle. And I've seen the way some alcoholics drink. Like, it's a miracle the days they don't too. So, like, good for y'all. But when I was like 9 months sober, my life kind of fell apart, and there was just like this intensely traumatic situation that I had gone through, and it was probably the worst thing to date I've ever been through in my entire life. And I remember at one point I was just crying, and I kept saying, like, I kept trying to say the third step prayer, but I couldn't pray. Every time I started praying, I would just start crying, and somebody looked at me and he said, have you ever considered that maybe that's your prayer? And for some reason, like, it was in that moment, like in the darkest moment of my sobriety thus far, and maybe my life, where I finally felt like this thing was accessible to me. Like, there is something out there that I can connect with. Like it says in the book, God doesn't make too hard terms with those who seek him. And I like to make things extremely difficult. But realizing that just like crying, like physically, emotionally, whatever, and just being like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. Like, that's what got me through early sobriety, really, is saying, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Like, when I come up with a plan, okay, I've never told anybody this story before, and it just hit me. My first semester of college, I had a crush on a guy, and so I came up with this 5-step plan to make him like me. And the only thing I got from it was like a crippling cigarette addiction. So anytime I come up with a plan, it does not work. And so, you know, in that moment where I'm realizing, like, I don't have a plan. I don't know if I'm going to be okay. Like, I really don't. But I am okay in this moment. Like, this is a disaster. I hate everything about the situation. I want to crawl out of my skin. And if I could get drunk right now, like, that would help so much. but for half a second, and then my world would crumble even more. Realizing that, like, that was not going to be the solution to this problem, and it's not a solution to any of my problems. Like, when I stop drinking, I'm left with the chaos that I created when I drank. There's this children's book, The Little Prince, and I had to read it in my French class growing up, and it's about this little prince, well, there you go, who goes from, like, planet to planet visiting all these strange people. And I very distinctly remember him visiting one guy on a planet who they call a drunkard. And he asks the guy, why do you drink? And the guy says, to forget. And the little prince says, to forget what? And he said, the shame of drinking. And, like, that was, like, the cycle that I stayed in. Like, and I knew that if I were to drink in the midst of this chaos that was going on, that I would just forever be trying to block out this shame of drinking and, like, these feelings. Like, it wasn't actually going to solve anything. It was just going to be a spiritual death for me, and it would be very quick. And by that point, I had already worked the steps with my sponsor, and I had already had 9 months of sobriety to show me, like, I can get through things sober. And, like, I can't, but, like, using the principles of AA, it is possible to stay sober through some incredibly challenging things. And sometimes people say, like, oh, you went through these hard things, like, wow. And it's like, no, I'm not special. Like, anybody can do it. Anybody. Jim Hughes has done it several times, so, like, anybody can. No, like, for me, I had to learn that life was going to continue to happen. And it didn't matter how much I planned, how much I prepared, life was going to happen. And when these things happen, like, that's where I have a choice. Am I going to lean into spiritual principles? Am I going to lean into this toolkit that's been laid at my feet? Or am I going to try and do it my way again? And it wasn't until I did it both ways in sobriety that I realized that, you know, if I lean into AA, I get through it a little bit easier. And I come out a little bit less scarred, and I have less amends that I need to make, and everything just turns out better than if I had tried to force my way. And usually the end result, like the actual, like, objective end result is the same, but one way is so much easier to get through, and I'm much more grateful to be on the other side. And we talk about, like, faith in AA a lot, and I didn't have faith when I first got sober. It's like, I did not have faith that I was going to get through these hard things until I had gone through hard things and taken the suggestions that were given to me and realized, like, it's possible to stay sober through a hell of a lot more than I could have imagined coming in on day one. Like, I didn't know if it was possible to stay sober at all. And here I was going through these, like, big life things. Like, one of my best friends has been sober, like, 9 years, almost had to have her toe amputated the other day, and she's just sober as fine. Like, it happens. We laughed about it, and the doctors were like, I think maybe you guys need the psych ward instead, but, like, I don't know, sometimes in sobriety, like, these things happen, and it's like I can throw a fit over it. Like, since November, I broke my ankle, I ruptured my eardrum, I got COVID, and now both of my knees are apparently, my kneecaps are not positioned correctly. I found that out today. Apparently they're high and at an angle, so I don't know what that means, but I got weird kneecaps. And it's like I could sit here and I could be mad that, like, my health is not great, things are falling apart, or I can be like, you know what, like, it is what it is. Like, let me do the next right action, which is going to the doctor and calling my sponsor and going to a meeting and coming to speak. And, like, there's a lot of things that this life in AA has given me the ability to do. Like, I did not take care of my health when I was drinking. I don't know about y'all, but, like, I didn't go to the dentist, let alone brush my teeth, for probably, like, 7 years. Clearly in early sobriety, too, showering was very hard. Sometimes still can be, but Alcoholics Anonymous has, I feel like such a cliche when it's like, Alcoholics Anonymous has given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. And, like, the reality is, like, my life is not fancy. Like, clearly I got, like, several bones that are just hanging on for dear life. And, you know, there's a lot of things going on in my friendships and my relationships and at work that are stressful and scary. And, like, if I could sit down and design the way I want my life to look right now, like, this would not be it. Like, I would not be in Southern Pines speaking at a church with my knees sitting high and at an angle. Like, it's just not what I would pick for myself. But I highly doubt that any way I would choose it would give me the same peace and joy I have in my life right now. Knowing that life as it is can be tricky and sucks, but it's okay, and I'm okay, and like I can be useful to other people. Like, let me tell you, when I'm sitting there like down about my health and one of my sponsees calls me about something, like that gets me right out of myself. Like sponsees have saved my life, to be honest. And I didn't realize what my sponsor meant whenever she told me, like, you're doing more for me than I am for you, until like I had sponsees. And I was like, oh yeah, that's true. Like, whether or not you stay sober, like this is helping me, so thank you. Hope they stay sober. I know that sounded flippant, but so, you know, my relationship with my family today is so much different too. There was a period of time when I wasn't allowed to be with my older brother because my parents had to call the cops because I was trying to fight him, and I just wasn't trusted with him, and he had to be on certain medications that they couldn't let me be around. And now, like, I get to go hang out with my brother one-on-one, like, whenever I want, and he sends me texts. He just, he got into this group home, which has been a blessing to our family, but he'll send me texts like, hey, Rachel, it's Josh in Tennessee. I hope you're doing well. I'm like, Rachel, are you there? And I text him back, and then he never responds. And I'm like, well, okay. But, like, I have this beautiful relationship with my family now, and when I call my dad, for the first, 2 years, he panicked that it was going to be I'm lost in Madrid, please help. But now when I call, he doesn't panic. He's not worried that I'm halfway dead on the side of a road in Arkansas or something. Like, he knows that I'm probably on my way home from work, on my way home from a meeting, hanging out with some friends. Like, he trusts me now. And that took some years to build up for him and my mom. But my friendships, have grown. The people I've met in Alcoholics Anonymous, who else are you going to go to the hospital with because they're losing a toe and you're going to sit there and laugh? Like that, the friendships I've made in Alcoholics Anonymous have been some of the weirdest things and some of the biggest blessings in my life. If you had told me that I would actually enjoy sitting next to Riggs on a car ride over here, I would have laughed at you, because when I first got sober, I did not like anybody, especially not Riggs. Like, I always tell my sponsees when we get to the book, people who wouldn't normally mix, I'm always like, there was a guy in my home group, I'll just tell you it's Riggs, I did not like him. And I genuinely consider Riggs a friend today. Riggs hasn't changed a bit. Thank God, too, because he's great. But, I have learned to, not be, so in my head and mean and judgmental about people. I don't do it perfectly, don't get me wrong. But, the people Alcoholics Anonymous has brought into my life have been such a blessing. And they have been there with me through a lot of things, a lot of really difficult things. And I hope that I'm also able to be there for them through it. And like I said, this isn't how I would plan my life to look if I could, but I'm so grateful that it's the life I have. And I'm going to close with reading a little bit. That my sponsor made me read this a lot when I first got sober, and I didn't understand why. But I think it kind of sums up my experience in AA. Following the principles laid out in the Big Book has not always been comfortable, nor will I claim perfection. I have yet to find a place in the Big Book that says, now you have completed the steps, have a nice life. The program is a plan for a lifetime of daily living. There have been occasions when the temptation to slack off has won. I view each of these as learning opportunities. When I am willing to do the right thing, I am rewarded with an inner peace no amount of liquor could ever provide. When I am unwilling to do the right thing, I become restless, irritable, and discontent. It is always my choice. Through the 12 steps, I have been granted the gift of choice. I am no longer at the mercy of a disease that tells me the only answer is to drink. If willingness is the key to unlock the gates of hell, it is action that opens those doors so that we may walk freely among the living. Thank you.